there, welcome to my first video. I know that you guys didn't click on this video to hear me ramble about nothing. You clicked here to hear me ramble about Albert Fish. So I hope you enjoy. Let's just jump right into it. Though before I start, I want to give like a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't mean any disrespect that I talk about. I also don't intend to infringe on any sort of copyright. The purposes of this video is to educate others on the crimes committed by Albert Fish and allow his victims and crimes to be known. So with that said, let's actually get into it. So Albert Fish was born May 19th, 1870, and he was actually named Hamilton Howard Fish, but he later changed it. His mother's name was Ellen Fish, and his father was Randall, who was 75 years old at the time of Albert's birth. Old men are getting it. So he was the youngest of 4 children, and at the age of 5, his father, Randall, died of a heart attack. And due to the lack of a second income, his mother was no longer able to provide for all 4 children. So he was placed into an orphanage. Now, this orphanage was very brutal. He experienced regular beatings and bullying. The kids would call him Ham and Eggs as like a teasing nickname. So that's kind of why he changed his name to Albert after a deceased older sibling, to kind of try and escape that nickname. And this orphanage stay really shaped Albert's personality. He was subjected to beatings, abuse, forced nudity, and humiliation from those who took care of the children, and he started to get erections during this time, which just caused his teasing and bullying by the other kids to kind of skyrocket more, and then his beatings would worsen because people at the orphanage were like, that's gross. So it was just really an endless cycle, because he would get beat and then he would get hard, so he would get beat and then he would get hard. It wasn't a good time. At the age of 9, his mother landed a government job, so she was finally having like a decent income. So she was able to collect Albert, as she could now take care of him. But those 4 years in his life at the orphanage really shaped him. It was very overcrowded, underfunded, and he turned into a masochist from his stay. It really opened him to that kind of thing. When he went back with his mother, he got into a relationship with a neighborhood boy, and this boy and Albert did many things together. They were known to drink their own urine and eat their own feces. I don't mean to kink shame. I really don't. But maybe at that young of an age, start with something lighter. Or don't have sex at all at that age. Not a good idea. Anyway, at this time, Albert was also known to start self-harming. And I don't believe this was due to a coping mechanism like a lot of people unfortunately do. They will self-harm to kind of deal with a different kind of pain than emotional pain. I believe this was truly just for sexual satisfaction. Albert Fish's other hobbies of his when he was still younger included going into bathhouses to watch other boys undress, and he would also find women's names and addresses in newspaper ads and matrimonial agencies, and he would send them very vulgar and obscene letters. And this caused him to get arrested multiple times, which he had it coming. So in 1890, Albert moved to New York City, where he would often rape and sodomize children. Unfortunately, he has stated in the past that he often went after both Black and mentally disabled children, as he didn't feel as though people would look for them or be worried enough to like miss them or whatever, which is really awful. In New York, Albert worked as both a male prostitute and a house painter. He was able to do, he was like a jack of all trades. His house painting job would take him all over America, which allowed him to lure children and teenagers into the houses that he was working at, where he would rape and torture them. And because he was kind of going all over America, he was never able to, stay at one place, and that kept him from really getting caught or people getting suspicious of him. Albert's mother arranged a marriage with a woman who was 9 years younger than him, and her name was Mary Hoffman, in 1898. They had a total of 6 children together, 4 boys and 2 girls, and Albert was said to be a good father, though he was just like a strange kind of guy, he was just weird. His children say he never touched them or really abused them in any sort of way, although he would often get them to hurt him for his pleasure. He would get them to play a game with him where he would sit on all 4s and have a child on his back, and then the child would hold up any amount of fingers. So let's say I'm sitting on his back, I'm holding up 6 fingers. He would guess the amount of fingers I was holding up, and if he guessed wrong, I would hit him with a paddle that was filled with nails 6 times. Yikes. Also during this time, Albert had a few brushes with the law. He was arrested and held for a few years for both embezzlement and grand larceny. In 1910, the fascination with sexual mutilation was sparked in Albert when he went on a date to a museum and he saw a figure of a dissected penis. One hell of a museum. Anyway, it was also in 1910 when he met and formed a relationship with Thomas Kedden, a 19-year-old mentally disabled man. Albert took Thomas to an abandoned farmhouse, tied him up, and tortured him for 2 weeks. I think he was planning on killing him, though he eventually decided against it. He was afraid of getting caught, so he just cut off his penis. Great. He gave him a final sweet kiss, left him $10, I guess, as compensation, and then left him in the abandoned farmhouse. No one knows what had happened to Thomas. We don't know if he died there, if he was found and rescued. I just really hope the best for him, that's really awful. In 1917, Anna left Albert for another man, which definitely took a significant toll on his mental health. He was very stressed, understandably so, because he had to take all 6 children and care for them on his own, which made him begin more extreme self-harm methods. He would stick needles into his body, mainly his hips, and then he would put them in so deep that he would be unable to retrieve them. When he was caught closer to the end of his life, he had an x-ray done and they found over 29 needles left in his body. He would also shove steel wool that was drenched in lighter fluid into his anus, and he would light it. Albert was also known to begin to get interested in cannibalism at this time, and he would start eating raw meat. He carried articles about cannibalism on his person pretty much all the time, and there were multiple points where he was examined by mental health professionals where he was said to be disturbed but sane. During this time, he was also known to spend some time in mental health facilities, but it was never more than a couple weeks. So it is kind of hard to record when people think he first started taking the steps into murdering people rather than just raping and torturing. It is believed in 1919 is when he first did his first murder. The first murder victim is thought to be a mentally disabled boy he stabbed quite a few times in Georgetown, Washington. There were a lot of children he attempted to murder, but they were able to get away. Luckily for him, remember, he was a painter, so he would only stay in one area for a little while until he finished a job, and then he would leave. And because he was a stranger to the children he was trying to kill, he would never be suspected. People weren't like, who was it? And they were like, oh, it's Albert. No, they were like, it was some weird old lanky dude. He also claimed to have paid young boys to help him lure other children to him. One instance, there was a little girl named Beatrice Keel, I believe. He offered her money to help him gather rhubarb, and her mother scared him away. Later that night, he was found sleeping in their barn on the property, and then his father went out to shoo him off. I don't know how they knew he was in the barn, they just did. Albert's next successful victim was Francis McDonald, who he lured away from his friends into a wooded area by where he lived. The murder was very brutal, unfortunately. Albert strangled Francis with his own suspenders, and he would cut up his limbs. On his one leg, his hamstring was almost completely off of his bone. Albert had left him hanging in a tree, and his body was later found by a search party his parents sent out when he didn't come home. His friends, when questioned, would describe Albert as an old man with a gray mustache, and Francis's mother, when questioned, said that she saw Albert walking down the road and noticed how gray he looked and faded, which is what gave Albert Fish the nickname the Gray Man. Albert had confessed to wanting to castrate Francis, but he heard a noise in the area and he was spooked, so he ran off so he would not be caught. In 1927, Albert committed another murder on a young boy named Billy Gaffney. Billy was a 4-year-old boy, and when Albert Fish found him, he was playing in a hallway outside of his apartment with his friend, Billy Baton. Both boys went missing for a few hours, but later Billy Baton was found alive and playing on the roof. Police searchers asked him what had happened to his friend Billy, and he said that the boogeyman took him, which is where Albert Fish also got the name the Boogeyman. There were a few witnesses who stated that they saw a young boy fitting Billy's description in a trolley with an older gentleman. They say that they saw him crying for his mother, while the older man was trying to quiet him. Billy's body was never found, but after the arrest of Albert Fish, he admitted to butchering and eating the 4-year-old boy. In 1928, Fish had also invited a boy named Cyril Quinn into his apartment with his friend. Cyril had already had a past of being molested by Albert Fish, so he was kind of more used to going into Albert's home. Albert had put the boys into his bedroom and told them to play while he got the sandwiches ready, and while they were roughhousing, they ended up pushing Albert Fish's mattress back, which had led them to discover his implements of hell, which included a saw, a knife, and a cleaver. Both of the boys, obviously terrified, then proceeded to run straight out of the building without a word. 1928 also happened to be the year of Albert's most famous killing. In May, he read a newspaper ad that said, "Young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West Street South." Albert would arrive at the home on 28th of May. The original plan Albert had conducted was to tie Edward up, mutilate him, and let him bleed to death. Albert would impose as a farmer from Long Island named Frank Howard, and he agreed to hire both Edward and his friend Willie, though he decided to come back in a week and pick them up to bring them back with him to his farm. Although he did end up sending a telegram saying that he would be a little bit delayed, he eventually did show up to pick the boys. It was then he was introduced to Edward's younger sister, Grace Budd. Now, I have heard 2 different versions of this, so I don't know which one is right. It was either that the boys were not ready to go, they had not finished packing, and I had also heard Albert just flat out lied and said, yeah, I have to go attend my niece's birthday party real quick. And he left, and then he was planning on coming back. Either way, I don't know which one is exactly right, but yeah. Either way, he did end up telling them that he did have a birthday party to attend for his niece anyway, so he was just going to go there and then come back later in the night. And just as he was walking out of the door, he turned around and he said, "You know what? There's going to be a lot of girls Grace's age. Would she like to come? She would probably have a lot of fun." And though Grace's mother was very against the idea, she was very skeptical because he was a strange man that they didn't know, and she didn't really feel safe trusting her daughter to go alone with him. The father ended up saying, "Just let her go, she's going to have a fun time." And she reluctantly agreed, and Edward told them that he would be back at 9 p.m. The day soon turned into night, and the night soon turned into morning, with no sign of Grace and Albert. At first, during the night, they just thought maybe Grace had lost track of time, though when the sun came up the next morning, Albert Budd, who was Grace and Edward's father, went to a address that Albert had given them. That's where he said the party was, but he soon found out that the address did not exist. Soon Albert Budd went to the nearest police station and was sent to Detective William King of the Missing Persons Bureau. Detective King quickly found out there was no Frank Howard in Farmingdale, and the kidnapper had covered his tracks well. Of course, it was the early 1900s. It was really easy to do that, give him a fake name and you're set. Albert Fish had even been able to take back the telegram that he had sent previously about him being a little bit delayed, so they could not track it back to him. It took quite a long time for Detective King to get all the copies of the telegrams that the company had kept, though he did finally end up getting the one that Albert Fish had sent to the Budd family, which traced them back to East Harlem. He then was able to find the shop where Albert purchased some strawberries and pot cheese that he had brought with him to the family when he went to pick up Edward, and the shopkeep was able to vaguely describe Albert Fish, but he could not give any real leads on his identity. The case did eventually end up running cold, and all the other detectives were sent on to different cases, but Detective King was very determined to find Grace. He was just really attached to this case, as a lot of detectives can be. They get very invested into trying to help certain people. There were 2 times where he thought he had the right man. The men who were suspected were Albert Cart Hall and Charles Edward Pope. Charles was actually charged with the crime based on an accusation from his ex-wife. However, Miss Budd confirmed that Charles was not the right man, and it had later come out that his ex-wife had accused him because they had a very rocky marriage, and she hated him, and she thought accusing him for the abduction of a little girl would get him taken away. That's toxic. Albert, on the other hand, was a con man who had attempted to kidnap a young girl from an adoption agency, and he also fitted the description of Albert Fish, though it was found that he was in jail at the time of Grace's abduction, so it couldn't have been him, and it would be years until a new lead would have been picked up. In 1934, an anonymous letter appeared at the Budd household, and it is really long, so I'm not going to fully list everything in it, because that would take a long time. But it described the death and cannibalization of Grace Budd. It also contained details of other killings and cannibalization, but this was the letter that had A, been mailed to Mrs. Budd, and B, gotten Albert Fish arrested for the murder of Grace. So most of the time when this letter is spoken about, it is mainly just about Grace. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on as well. I'm going to give like a quick little snippet of the letter. If you want to kind of skip it, feel free to go to the timestamp. But other than that, I will begin reading. On Sunday, June 3rd, 1928, I had called you at 406 West 15th Street. I brought you pot cheese and strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester that I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside and pick wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped off all my clothes. I knew if I did not, I would get blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. I had then hid in a closet in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her, and she said she would tell her mamma. First, I stripped her naked. How did she kick, bite, and scratch? I choked her to death and then cut her up into small pieces so I could take her meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it. How sweet her tender little ass tasted in the roasted oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her, though. I could have if I wished. She died a virgin. As soon as the Budd family got the letter, it was given to the police, and Detective King was really thrilled to have a new lead on this case finally. The envelope itself had the letters NYPCBA, which stood for the New York Private Chauffeurs Benvolot Association. The company fully cooperated with police, and over 400 employees' handwriting was tested against the letter. No, none of them were a match. One man did come forward saying that he had left a few papers and envelopes at a boarding house. Detective King went straight to the address of the boarding house and was told a man who had matched the exact description of Frank Howard had been staying there. Unfortunately, Albert Fish had already left, though they were able to compare the letter to the handwriting at the board's registry, and they found it to be a match. That is when police had discovered that Frank Howard's real name was Albert Fish. Although Albert had already left, the landlady told Detective King that Albert got a check from his son delivered to the boarding house once a month. In order not to miss him again, Detective King took a room with a good view of the entrance and hallways. On December 13th, Detective King was at the police station filing some paperwork, you know how one does, when he received a call from the landlady at the boarding house saying that Albert was there collecting his check. While Detective King was on his way, the landlady offered Albert a cup of tea and they sat and chatted for a bit. Soon, Detective King ran into the boarding house with his gun drawn, and it said Albert didn't do much to hide himself or his identity, though he did try and put up a fight. Albert pulled 2 straight razors from his pocket, one in each hand, but Detective King was easily able to dodge Albert coming at him and took the razors away. When Detective King was able to restrain him, it is said that Fish had an alarming number of blades, though I wasn't able to find an exact number. Once at the police station, Albert had admitted to the murder and cannibalization of Grace Budd, and explained it to all the police officers and detectives in graphic detail. Fish also confessed to more murders in graphic detail, but he would also throw in more stories that were clearly fake or very, very exaggerated. He would say that he had a child in every state. He would convince that he did indeed rape Grace Budd, though he had stated in the letter that he didn't, that he had molested over 100 children, and that he was acting on the will of God. Although a lot of this, you can't really know if you can trust it, because it is said that he was known to be a compulsive liar. On March 11th, 1935, the trial of Albert Fish for the murder and cannibalization of Grace Budd began. Though he pled not guilty by reason of insanity, he would not deny the fact that he did commit these crimes, and if you remember before, multiple times he had been tested by mental health professionals and was found deranged but ultimately sane. The trial lasted 10 days, and they quickly found him both guilty and sane. Though even if there were people who thought he was indeed insane, he should still pay the ultimate price for his crimes, and he was sentenced to death by electric chair. Albert Fish has stated, "It will be the only thrill I have not tried," and he was stated to be very excited for his execution. On January 16, 1936, Albert walked calmly and unassisted to the execution chamber and even helped the executioner place the electrodes. There are 2 different believed last words from Albert Fish. Some believe he stated, "I don't know why I'm here," and others said he said, "But it wasn't the right verdict. I'm not really sane, you know." Though his real kill count will never be known, like with a lot of serial killers, it is estimated he has killed about 15, mostly children, and then also believed to have victimized at least 100 others. The lawyer who defended Albert Fish was also in possession of Albert's final statements, and when he was asked by reporters if he would be sharing them, he stated, "I will never show it to anyone. It is the most filthy string of obscenities I have ever read." We are nearing the end of the video. I just wanted to put a little list of people who Albert was suspected of murdering. I don't want it to come across that their deaths were any less important. It is still very tragic that they were murdered, though they were not confirmed killings of Albert Fish. They were all just suspected. So I didn't want to confuse anyone and make them think that Albert had also taken these lives. It is just all speculation. So in 1926, Albert was suspected of the murder of Emma Richardson, who was 5 years old. In 1928, the body of Yetta Amberwit was found on the rooftop of her apartment building, and she was 12 years old. And then before Albert was eventually figured out, he was suspected of the murder of a 4-year-old girl named Emily Angling. In 1930, in 1931, he was suspected of the murder of Robert Jane Liu at age 6, and in 1932, he was suspected of the killing of Mary Ellen O'Connor at age 16 and Benjamin Collins, age 17. So that's the end of the video. We got through the first one. That's so great. I know this was kind of a longish video, especially for like my first proper video that I've made, but Albert Fish is kind of the one who started me on true crime, so I thought I should dedicate my first video not to him because he's a monster, but like his victims. I thought I should like talk about him because he was my first getting into it, so I was like, he should also be like my first video getting into YouTube. So, you know. Also, I don't know why I look so gray. Like, it's better with the ring light if I turn it away. I'm like black and white. I tested this camera out before a few days ago, but it was during the day and it worked a lot better, so maybe next time I'll just like film with some natural light because this is obviously kind of shit. Unless it adds to like the spooky vibe of it. I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like, this is super huge. I really appreciate it. If you could be so kind as to maybe like the video, that would be great. If you have any like suggestions on future cases, on how to improve my content, any like opinions on Albert Fish, drop them. If you just want to talk about like random stuff, leave a comment. I will read it. It'll make me happy. And also subscribe if you are interested in maybe me rambling about future killers, because that would be pretty cool too. I need to stop doing that. Anyway, thank you so much. Have a good day or night or whatever. Bye.